it gets confusing sometimes. Okay, so for example, if something happens on a Friday, May 2nd, and then it crosses into midnight, and then technically it's Saturday, May 3rd, and then something happens to you, uh, there's no doubt it's May 3rd, right? Somehow I got confused with the dates, and I thought, oh, it was May 3rd was the Friday, and the something happened went into Saturday morning, May 4th, and that's why today, May 4th, I designated this day as the day I would talk about my cousin Stefan Guillermo. And so I'm doing it today, May 4th, because I got the dates wrong, because it's been 9 years and a lot's happened to the family, a lot's happened to me and society, right? We went through 3 years of the pandemic, which really did a lot to not shatter our family, but it just made being family difficult, made being family hard. And so here we are on May 4th, and, there's no real reach out to remember probably one of the key moments in our family's history, the Guillermo family history, such that it is so many Guillermos, and this is like my family, and I'm the oldest one in the family, or actually my sister is. But this is the modern way, and I'm talking to the internet, I'm talking to people about something very personal, but I think it's very real, and it's very American, really, in terms of where we are now as a country. Welcome to Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable. I am the broadcaster, the microcaster, the second screen content maker, Emil Guillermo. I mean, that's how you should use this. I mean, I picked up that word from the New Yorker article on the Writers Guild, and writers are complaining that, not only do the studios want to cut back on the writers' rooms, but they don't want the big content, the content of the great scenes and stories that they want. They want what they call second screen content, which is content that you can play while you're doing something else. You just have it on the screen. It's sort of like radio, which is what this is like. So consider this second screen content. Just turn it on and say, here's my buddy Emil, and he comes on live at 2 p.m. every day to talk about, his life, to talk about his experience, mostly as a journalist, but sometimes just as a real human being. And isn't that lovely? And just as a way to check in this internet world, to say, hey, here's a human being who's being human. And that's nice in this AI world. I am not AI. I am not AI. I am EMIL. I'm not AI. So welcome to Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable. And as I mentioned, I screwed up on the dates. I mean, my cousin went out on Friday, May the 2nd, 2014. He was shot and killed past midnight into Saturday, May 3rd. That's when he was found dead. And so, yeah, May 3rd is the date. Make no mistake. But for some reason, it's been 9 years, and I thought, oh, well, it was May 3rd, Friday, and it spilled over into Saturday morning, May 4th, and that's why we're talking about it today. But really, the reason why we're talking about it today is because, well, there was no gathering. There was no memorial that I know of that I was invited to. I'm a family member. But if you go to my Twitter page, you'll see at the banner, it says Justice for Stefan. And you might say, oh, who is Stefan? Stephen Curry, we want him to have justice and score 50 points on game 7 because we need the Warriors to win against the Sacramento Kings. Is that justice for Stephen, Emil? I wish. No, justice for Stephen was my cousin, Stephen Guillermo. And I just want to devote this show today to talk about him because his story is the real story. It's a story of we're talking about AANHPI month. His is the American Filipino story of his generation, right? The link between my father's generation, which was the first to come to America in the 20s and 30s, the so-called Manong generation. They had me as a son, right? But my story is, well, my story, I've lived my story. I'm telling my story, but Stephen's story really was the replication of my father. Because I'm not the immigrant. Stephen was the immigrant. Stephen comes in like the 1990s after his parents, who are the related to my dad, they apply, right? They have been petitioned for by the Guillermo family members here, and they wait in line for like 20 years. I mean, that's the Asian American experience, to be petitioned for and then to wait in line in the Philippines and then to have babies and have families while waiting in line. And that was Stephen. Stephen was born essentially while his parents were waiting in line to be accepted into America. And then he ages, and by the time he gets to America, it is 1990s, the late 1990s. They come in, and I remember the family getting together, and boy, it was like this was the second coming of the Guillermos. I mean, this is the thing. It's always the initial immigrant, my dad, right? Who wasn't an immigrant. He was an American national. He was a colonized American who came here without need for papers because they were colonized. So he comes in. That really is the first wave, and then I'm born here, so I'm not a wave. I'm just here. And so the next wave of immigrant really is Stephen's mom and dad, who were waiting in line. Now they get here. It's the 90s. They get petitioned for sometime in the 70s, and it takes 20 years. Here they are. And the new Asian American is not just the immigrant, but the young immigrant, right? The generation of the Stephens, who comes in the late 1990s. And in 2014, he's a 26-year-old kid. He's gone to San Francisco State. He's worked his way through college. He has taken some time to work. He's about to graduate. He goes out on a Friday night and he's excited. It's May the 2nd on a Friday night. He's with friends. He's goes to a bar. He gets a little tipsy, but he's celebrating because he's about to graduate from San Francisco State. It's May, right? He's an older guy, 26. No young guy. A far cry from the little boy that I met back in the 90s, who'd look up to me. And he would be the way that I would check to make sure that I said my name the right way, that I said, now, Stephen, it's Guillermo, right? Oh, yes, Uncle Guillermo. Okay, all right. He was my Tagalog verification. Make sure that, when people say, oh, it's Guillermo. No, it's Guillermo, right, Stephen? Oh, yes, Uncle Guillermo. So he was that verification for me. So Stefan, 26, goes out Friday night, May 2nd, has fun, goes into Saturday, doesn't drive, right? He lives south of Market, not in the hip places, but the Fifth and Mission, the Mint Mall apartments. The Mint Mall apartments. That's where a lot of immigrants go, right? They jam all their things into a 3-room apartment, 5, 6 people. It's just like the experience of my dad in the 20s. Still, he might have had a night with friends. He was responsible enough not to drive, sober enough to text home. He lived on the 5th floor. He got off on the 3rd. And when he couldn't get into the identical apartment on the different floor, because it all looks the same, right, when you're drunk, a resident tenant, a 68-year-old security guard, look, I know what 68 feels like. A retired security guard, 68, shoots him through the door. Or maybe the door was open. The police were still trying to get the facts. But the only witness was the shooter, who I've named in the past, but no need to name nor shame. I'm not out to get any kind of revenge in that way. He turned himself in and was under arrest for suspicion of murder and was in custody. They got the man. There was enough reason to charge this person. They could have charged him. But because of California's Stand Your Ground, the version of Stand Your Ground, the killer was set free and returned to his apartment. Now, this is kind of typical now. I mean, 14 years later, what did we have recently in the span of 6 days? We had 7 people. This is within the span of 6 days in April 20th. 7 people across the U.S. shot, one fatally for making really what is pretty ordinary and unavoidable. You show up at the wrong place. I mean, you remember those stories. There was the Texas man who shot 2 cheerleaders because one of them mistakenly got into a guy's car thinking it was her car. And the guy ends up shooting her. Or that you got, remember that these were well publicized stories across the nation. You got a group looking for a friend's house in upstate New York. They go into the wrong driveway. And then a guy comes out of the house and shoots at the car, fatally shooting a young woman. And then you had another case. I mean, wrong place. I mean, these are wrong place shootings. And it's a thing. 9 years after my cousin in 2014 was in the wrong place. So you had in Missouri, I guess one of the most publicized wrong way shootings. Kansas City teen shot twice after going to the wrong home to pick up his younger brothers. He fortunately wasn't killed, but this is a common thing, being in the wrong place. And here we are 9 years later, right? Every time those stories made the headlines. I just couldn't help but think about Stefan. Stefan was in the right building, but he just was on the wrong floor. The wrong floor. And being on the wrong floor meant the guy who was on the other side of the door pulls out a gun, shoots once. Stefan's dead. They had the murderer. They had him for a couple days. They let him go. I did all I could to make sure that they held the man and just held him accountable. That's all I wanted. I didn't want my cousin to die for naught. We knew who did it. There was no one else who could have done it. But the painful thing is they just let that man go. And so it was the day that the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco commemorated Asian Pacific American Heritage Month that year, 2014. I went before the board and I just tried to express that, I hope that, as I said, I was there with family members and friends to urge the supervisors to support justice for Stefan Guillermo, to make sure that the self-professed killer who turned himself in could be held accountable, or would be held accountable. And as I told the Board of Supervisors, I just wanted the San Francisco Police Department and the DA simply to do their jobs, gather the facts, make the case against the murderer. There was enough to charge Mr. the suspect. There was enough. They had him. But the city and county of San Francisco didn't want to challenge the version of the stand your ground law that exists in California. I mean, that really was it. There's an idea called the castle doctrine. And it's that in protecting one's castle, you can justify deadly force in the state. And that is the reason why the DA wouldn't go forward. The criminal law says you have a right to use deadly force if you feel threatened. But my rebuttal was, it's still based on what a reasonable man would do. Is it reasonable for someone, after hearing a knock on the door, to fear for his life and then to shoot the person on entry? If the door was open for him, those facts still aren't clear. But his fatal mistake was getting off that on the wrong floor of his apartment building. No doubt. And then after that was a matter of police work and fact finding, and it was just very difficult to find out with just one witness. Very difficult to find out exactly what happened up to the point that is undisputed. It's undisputed that this one suspect shot and killed my cousin. But what would a reasonable man do? A reasonable man does not hear a neighbor knocking on the door and then shoot him. The question remains, was my cousin, was he let in? I mean, if he was let in, a reasonable man does not believe he's in danger when he sees Stefan Guillermo, who's smallish, unarmed, a nonviolent person. Reasonable man doesn't shoot first, answer questions later. I mean, indeed, why does a reasonable man in San Francisco? Well, of course, we're talking about 2014. Why would there even be a need for a gun? To protect himself from Stefan Guillermo. And I just thought those are reasonable questions. And if this suspect were charged with murder, he'd have to explain his actions. The DA simply should not presume that the shooter had a reasonable fear of imminent peril of death or great bodily injury to self, which is what the law states. We shouldn't make it easy for people to use guns impulsively without consequences, even if they're afraid of something. And my feeling was that this guy should be held accountable for his actions. But he wasn't. The killer was set free within the 3 days that they could hold him. And then the police and the DA said they did all they could, and they just failed. My cousin, his family, his friends. And ultimately, because this, in bowing to the law, the SFPD and the DA failed the city and county of San Francisco. People of the state. I mean, that's all I could do as a reporter, as a journalist, as a family member. Make people see the travesty of letting a killer go. But they did. George Gascon was the DA at the time. And I remember talking to him. At the time that he was reducing sentencing for nonviolent killers and, doing a very political thing, because that's what politicians do. I said, I asked him point blank, why didn't you prosecute? Why did you let my cousin's killer go? Because in some ways, the failure of the prosecution, or the failure to prosecute, might have been a greater, more egregious assault on the Guillermo family than the murder itself. I mean, the murder is bad. Guy got away with it. But then the city, even though they had the culprit, did not press charges because of this stand your ground law, which he would have had to have proven that he was in fear of this slight built, young guy, Filipino American. But I asked Gascon, what gives? And he said, well, Emil, your cousin is one man. I'm protecting all of San Francisco. One man wasn't enough. One man's death wasn't enough for the very political DA, who is now in LA as the DA and has just as mixed results down there as he does up here. But you see how it is political. You see how there's a story just this week about a guy who shoots a shoplifter in San Francisco, says, I'm mad as hell and I'm going to shoot him. Well, I don't know, I'm paraphrasing there. But the district attorney, Brooke Jenkins, refuses to go after this guy. Politics. So Stefan Guillermo is a victim of politics because he was one man, didn't represent a group, an aggrieved group, aside from the Guillermo family, and it wasn't worth it for them to go after the killer. It wasn't high profile enough. It was just a handgun. It wasn't an AR-15. It was two people of color, both relatively poor, not members of the 1%, who lived in the south of Market. Two people who are invisible, don't count, whose passing, whose deaths, no one will note. And the case is a cold case, and it's not like anyone really wants to know anymore what happened. I mean, I think I know what happened. Well, I know enough of what happened. He was shot by a guy. That's the big picture. And the guy was let go because the laws allowed for that. I don't know exactly if he was let in. I know my cousin didn't break in, although some people said they might have heard him bang on a door. Sometimes that's frightening if you're 68 years old. I remember 9 years ago, I thought, oh, if someone bangs on the door, I'm 68, I'm all by myself, I might be scared. I live in the south of Market. It's not necessarily the safest. It's not the most dangerous. Guy was a former security guard. He was ready for that. The guy who shot my cousin had a little 22 Saturday night special. Boom, one shot. That was enough. It was a wrong way death. So I'm just still bothered by it, but I've dealt with it. I mean, nothing's going to happen in terms of, well, is the law going to change, or is the DA going to open up the case if they found any more information? No, they're just, it's just one of those solved cases where I urged the DA to make a political stand out of it, that the stand your ground laws were wrong, that the stand your ground laws were such that it would encourage people just to take out a gun and shoot. And certainly after that moment in 2014, we saw a few more stand your ground things. The thing is, the DA works with the police, and the police, they rely on stand your ground laws to justify self-defense. So once again, it's unfortunate that this was not a high profile case, no matter how hard I tried to make it a high profile. It wasn't an AR-15. It wasn't a cop. It wasn't a famous person. It was just two poor people and a gun. And one of the poor people died. And no one cares. And that's the way it is in America. Really. And so, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It's not Asian American history, right? It's heritage. We can still be happy about, who we are as a people and all that. History, it's another matter. So maybe this is more history, but there is a cultural thing there too. Because as I said, Stefan was part of this new wave of Asian American coming into America after the initial wave in the 20s and 30s. And then the 1965 law, and his parents were brought in under the 65 law, and they had to wait in line. It took 20 years, but they got in. And he was the beginning of the parents, and he was born in the line, waiting to get into America. And then for him to have this fate, it's just, it's a part of AA NHPI Heritage Month. One of the stories. And I don't know what can be done, except, there were cases where people challenged castle doctrine. Remember, it's kind of the basis of the Trayvon Martin, that defense. The forget the guy, the culprit, the shooter. But stand your ground. It's all over the country. It's all based on that idea, the castle doctrine. Your home is your castle. You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to shoot. And I don't know where we are now. Maybe with the rash of these wrong way deaths that we've seen. Certainly, all the wrong way deaths that I cited, they are taking stands against the people who shot. The guy who shot Ralph Yarl, they're taking stands against him. They're taking stands against the shooter in New York who shot the girl who went in the wrong driveway. So maybe we're seeing people understand that you can't use castle doctrine in every case. You got to challenge it. They didn't in San Francisco, liberal San Francisco. They didn't challenge for my cousin. I miss him. I mean, he would have been not quite 40. It would have been great to pal around with him. See how he developed from, I think I first met him when he was 7 or 8. But it's funny how this case, no one wanted to speak out. No one wanted to do what I was prepared to do on a public level, talking about the case to try to get publicity, not necessarily for myself, but just so people knew about it and would maybe do something about it, because that's how things get done in America. And we were all set to do something for a national broadcast show. And when it was time to roll the cameras, sit down for the interview, I was the only one there. No one wanted to stand up for justice. That's a reality. And so there's a lot of schisms in the family. Different approaches, different styles. We get the same result, though. We don't bring back Stefan. But the impact of his death, the impact of what happened to him, remains with the family. So, and then we had 3 years of COVID, and it's hard to piece everything back together. But I know that all of us, in our own way, wherever we are, we're all, if you knew him, you're thinking about Stefan today or these last couple of days, because it was after his death. As I said, he was shot on the 2nd, went into the 3rd. After his death on May 4th and 5th and 6th, there was a real effort. And go to that Twitter page, at Emil Amok, and you'll see where there's like relatives holding up a makeshift sign wanting justice for Stefan. We wanted to make it a thing so that people would know, hey, what's wrong with the laws? Change the laws. How can someone just on a feeling, on an impulse that they have some kind of fear, just take out a gun and justifiably shoot someone? But you can't in America. Or California law provides for it. So, still healing, but okay. I mean, by virtue of talking about it, I'm okay. I mean, I'm not. It's just that every year we go through this memory, not to beat ourselves up about what we couldn't do or didn't do or should have done. Really, it's over the limitations of the law, which limited what we could do. And of course, none of it brings back Stefan. So we have lived these last 9 years without him. I remember just a couple weeks before, I'd gotten a hold of him and I said, hey, let's go to a baseball game. Let's go see the Giants. I mean, 2014, the Giants were on their run, right? 2010, 2012, 2014, they were still on a championship run. And he was wearing his Tim Lincecum jersey. And you can see, if you go to my Aldef blog, where I wrote in 2014, you can see his smiling face and the eye black. He had eye black. He had a picture of him at a baseball game with some friends. That actually was one of the high points, that in the aftermath of his murder, that we would get together as family at the Giants game, and we remembered the scoreboard. 3rd inning, bottom of the 3rd, Atlanta Braves and the Giants playing at the ballpark. And there was Stefan's face up on the screen. A little ballpark epitaph. So, a little remembrance for Stefan. And I hope, it's something, because every bit of gun violence, no matter what, from a handgun to an AR-15, every bit of handgun violence that we experience now. And we've had a couple already this week, right? Atlanta, Texas. We got a guy at UC Davis. It's a knife, but it's violence. So it's really any act of violence. We're still not jittery, but it does trigger off a memory. Still, I wish there was something we could do about that law. I wish there was something we could do about how the Castle Doctrine has really impacted the laws to make the use of guns justifiably legal, to murder or to take the law into your own hands. I think that's where maybe we need to see some change. Maybe that's where. Maybe in our lifetimes. I don't know. All right. That's it for today. Think of Stefan. Cute kid. Cute kid. Really, the handsome, charming, and to be gunned down by that kind of violence. And, you know, I was at an AAPI exit poll explanation given by the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund just before this. And they're explaining that there was a poll. 70% of people said they did not experience any kind of violence, you know, during the pandemic era, where violence was pretty much on the rise because of scapegoating comments by the former president. And I was thinking, all right, this is just the places where the ALDEF poll exit pollers were. They were in 15 states, big Asian American states. But, you know, you can't really nationalize the numbers and say, oh, 70% of Asian Americans feel this. 70% in this poll feel this, that they weren't impacted. And my feeling was, you know, that means 30% did feel. That's a high number. And it really doesn't matter if 70% didn't feel it, because the people who targeted and impacted those 30% weren't just looking at those 30%. They were looking for all of us. They were looking for each and every one of us. That was why you have, you know, things like hate crime laws. And when people during that that AAPI hate wave, when they were going after AAPI people, they weren't just going for them, those people that they, you know, targeted. They were going for all of us. You know, and I bring that up only because, you know, Stefan's death could have been any one of us. Especially those who might innocently show up at the wrong place. If the person on the other side has a gun and is ready to use it because they feel afraid. And afraid for the wrong reason, afraid for, you know, it doesn't make sense. One of the absurdities of Asian American life. It doesn't make sense. And so, 9th year remembrance, trying to make sense. It still doesn't. All right, that's our show for today. I'm Emil Guillermo. This is Emil Amok's Takeout. If you missed any or all or part of the show, it's like radio. Just use your finger and dial it back. Second screen content this is. Second screen case. Put it on, leave it on like radio, do your thing, do the dishes. Second screen content. Catch it on replay at amok.com. Also on YouTube, if you watch it there, or on Twitter at Emil Amok, or on YouTube. Yeah, Emil Amok 1 on YouTube. Regular listeners know I like to end with a little meditation. Actually, that's probably helped me the most. Meditation. I tell my friends, oh, during the pandemic, I went to med school. Meditation school. It's helped me. Especially the loving self-kindness meditations. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. On this day, we remember Steph and Guillermo. Mahal